Yeah, coaches, thanks for being on tonight, taking some time to talk coaching and culture. I'm really excited that you're here. Thanks for being patient with us. Like I mentioned, having a little bit of a technical difficulty tonight. And yeah, Tree and I are just having a whirlwind of a night before we hopped on. I told Tree that about 10 minutes before I hopped on, I walked in the door and I opened the garage door into my 3-year-old's foot and his toenail is bleeding. So that's how my night is going so far. So hopefully, only up from here, only up from here. But excited that Tree Beeckman has taken some time to talk with us, share some of her experience and expertise with us tonight. Coach Hatton, you just sent me a message, said 1 a.m. here in Wales. Well, thanks for hopping on at 1 a.m. Glad you we're willing to join us and see the value in it. Thanks for being a part. Like I said, Tree Beeckman, she former college volleyball coach, lots of experience coaching, and she's a culture coach. She also works with growing leaders, True North Sports, and does some things on her own, really working with coaches and teams to help them build stronger cultures, improve their leadership, grow coaches, and help them ultimately help their teams. And so just so you guys know, we'll start off, and in just a minute or two, I'll kick it over to Tree, and she'll kind of take us through a presentation on her model for culture that she coaches on. And then we'll have a Q&A time after that presentation, and then we'll wrap it up and get out of here. And just a couple of housekeeping things. If you would keep your mics muted, that will make it go smoothly for all of us. And then when we get to the Q&A part, I'll facilitate it. I may have you drop some questions in the chat, or I might ask you to unmute and ask your question to Tree. And during the presentation, if there's a question that comes up while she's presenting on something, you can just send it in a private message to me. That way it doesn't distract her as she's presenting. And we'll make sure that we circle back to it during the Q&A part. So again, appreciate you guys taking the time being on. And obviously, Tree, super grateful that you're willing to share with these coaches that are on live and the coaches that are going to watch the replay. So with that, Tree, assuming we're good with the technical difficulties, I'll turn it over to you.
We are just going to make it rock and roll without it. I have one slide, and I think that when I get to that slide, that is really going to be helpful if coaches see it. I'll share that one, and then we'll just go because the files are too big to send to you so last minute. So I am really excited to be here. And as Luke said in the intro, I was a volleyball coach for many years, but prior to that, I played anything that I could get my hands on. I did not play soccer. I did play American football in high school. I was the only girl on the boys team. And you could see, well, you can't see my screen, but there's a picture of me, and it's in all the, full get up and whatnot. But then I went on to play college softball. And from there, I started coaching volleyball because football is my favorite sport. And volleyball, from a strategy standpoint, at least to my understanding, is more like football than any of the other sports I had been exposed to. And I really loved that part of it. So I kind of got the volleyball bug while I was playing in college. And I had a really unique way of being able to experience being a student athlete while I was also coaching. And I was a varsity coach throughout my college career. So it was just an interesting way to come into what I'm doing. And so after 20 some years of coaching, I started to feel a little bit like, the video from, if you've seen the movie Rush Hour, where Jackie Chan's character gets off the plane and it's just assumed that he doesn't know how to speak the language. And, of course, you see the actor go, "Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?" And I play that clip a lot when I'm presenting because that's exactly how it felt when I got to Central Michigan. I was coaching at Central Michigan for volleyball, and connecting with players was something that I was always really, it came kind of naturally to me. And then I got here, and it was right around 2010, 11, 12. I noticed this really fast change. And so I started looking into it. And that's how I got connected with Growing Leaders, because there are some generational differences that affect how you build a culture. And that's where I've spent the last, 7 years or so. I just work with teams in all sports. because at the end of the day, you use a soccer ball. I used to use a volleyball. I played, and my coaches use a softball, but we're all coaching humans first. And I think it's at its like most fundamental level, that is the most important thing. So yeah, the strategy is different. The X's and O's are different, but when it comes down to it, we all coach humans. And I think that every generation, including back, in the days of Socrates, every generation has thoughts about the generation that follows it, certain things. They've been, a little judgy, if you will. But I do think that there is a difference in how the millennial generation and Gen Z have formed their identities and how they've communicated. And basically, the way that I would say it is, it's not all bad. Like, I adopted technology pretty early, tonight's mess ups notwithstanding. But I think that technology and social media has just evolved faster than we've been able to civilize it. And with that comes some very unique challenges that coaches, I think, are feeling in terms of building trust, in terms of risk aversion, in terms of role identity, in terms of leadership and leadership development. And that's kind of where I live my life. Like, I live in that Venn diagram. And so I'm just going to see if this will share. I created a model for, hold on here. Luke, please tell me if this comes through. Perfect. So I wrote a workbook recently.
Well, it said you started sharing, but I haven't seen the picture yet.
Oh,
It's still blank.
rats. Nothing?
Maybe try to stop the share and reshare it one more time.
I swear I know what I'm doing. It's my computer. It's a new computer too. I don't understand. How about now?
There it is. I can see it.
Excellent. Okay. So I wrote a workbook on behalf of a different nonprofit that I work with. We do like coach development and stuff like that, called True North Sports. So I wrote this workbook that they produced, and I actually teach a course on it at the University of Florida in their sports management program. This is an updated version of the model for culture. And so, as in the title of this webinar suggests, there are, 3 prongs, but there's a little bit more than that. And so here's when I kind of stepped out and decided I want to write this workbook that's really practical for coaches. I did it because of this. When we talk about team culture, it's a buzzword, and it has been for like 5 to 10 years, maybe longer. And I think that when we talk about team culture, so often we do one of two things. We either talk about team culture in terms of somebody else's culture, right? And we talk about it in terms of like, oh, I don't know, just examples of. And the one that I can think of, or the one that I'm kind of like, it's on my mind the most, is John Wooden's pyramid, right? So like, about 15, 20 years ago, when I first entered the college coaching game, everybody sort of just took the pyramid of success and they're like, this is going to be our culture. It's so perfect. And it is. It's fantastic. It took them years to build this thing, and it's wonderful. And yes, for sure, steal ideas from it all day. But using that as your actual cultural like thing, it doesn't work. And it didn't for anybody. Like, it might work for a really short time, but it doesn't work because you're not John Wooden, and neither am I. And it's the same thing. Like, I don't know if you happen to know of PJ Fleck, and I'll put it this way. If you love Ted Lasso, which I clearly do, I would love if him and Beard ran for president next time. If you're a Ted Lasso fan, Ted Lasso in that entire show is literally like art imitating life. PJ Fleck in the Minnesota Gophers, he's the football coach at Minnesota. He used to be at Western Michigan, where I was for a little bit too. He's a really big culture guy, and he has this thing, row the boat. Maybe you've heard of it. Thing is I can't take row the boat and use that as my entire culture because I'm not PJ Fleck. Like, I think he's awesome, but I'm not him. I can't take Bill Belichick's do your job because I'm not Bill Belichick. So I could go on and on. So that's one thing. We either talk about it by talking about examples of what people do, or we get really prescriptive. And there's a lot of good pieces of work about team culture, But I think you have to take in, and you have to kind of balance the tension of some of these resources. They try to get too prescriptive. And at the end of the day, if I had to name the very fundamentally most important credibility trait for coaches, especially with the this Gen Z generation of student athletes, I would say authenticity is absolutely number one. And so if I'm trying to take somebody else's culture and make that my culture, I'm going to lose trust immediately. My credibility is going to be shot. So what I did in the work, the Managing Your Culture workbook that I wrote on behalf of True North Sports, what I did was I tried to create a mental model that allows coaches to evaluate and kind of hang different components on that go into all team cultures, but do it in their own way. Because whether you think it or not, coaching a team and running a program and creating a culture is as a creative process as is making a Pixar animation film for Pixar animations. And so I learned that there's a great book called Creativity Inc. And it's written by Ed Catmull, who's one of the founders of Pixar. And then they kind of merged with Disney and they turned that whole thing around. And he talks about the importance of mental models in the creative process, and sport is creative. We don't tend to think of it that way, but it is absolutely a creative process. And so in a creative process, there are some things that are absolutely timeless. Psychological safety, it's a timelessly important thing. If you don't feel safe to screw up, you will not be as creative. So anyway, I took all of these things and these ideas and I tried to create a model that allows coaches to understand culture from a standpoint of, these are the things that go into it. These are some things that are timelessly important. Here's the model, and see if you can plug it in. And it's this, it's a plug. Little bit of a backstory. It's a plug because my late brother, who died suddenly in August of 2019, 3 years ago, just recently, the anniversary passed. He was an electrician, and he was also, his company was really interested in culture. And so we used to talk all the time. And we kind of came up with this model together before his death. And it's just this, if you think about all of the people that are on your teams or that make up your program, and that's coaches and players and support staff and parents and all these people that just touch your program, what you're trying to do is create a conduit that pulls all of the energy from those people and meshes it together in a really collaborative and synergistic way so that it can power the full team. And in order to make that conduit a healthy conduit of energy, there's some things that absolutely have to exist. The first one is the hot prong, and it's the hot prong of connection. Now, just so you know, if you do happen to get my workbook, this is an updated model. I've changed it slightly. So it basic same concepts. I've just changed the components a little bit. So don't be surprised when you have a slightly different component. But the hot prong is connection between the people. It's literally how your people connect with each other. It's how they trust each other. It's how psychologically safe it feels. It's how they manage conflict, right? It's how inclusive and how free they feel to give their opinion and be their full selves. Brene Brown says it best. We often use the terms fitting in and belonging interchangeably, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Fitting in, if you're trying to fit in somewhere, you can't belong because those people aren't seeing the authentic you. And I think that's what happens, especially with Generation Z, so who they're still trying to form their identity. And by the way, they did it on 14 different social media channels, right? So getting them to be fully who they are with the people that they're around and feel comfortable being themselves is huge. So that hot prong, this isn't necessarily a linear model, but I will say that hot prong, if you think about a real plug, if you don't have juice to the hot prong, nothing else matters. Like those components are all going to be there, but if you're not firing up the hot prong, okay, well, there's not electricity that's going to go to the microwave, period. So, and I could go on for days with the hot prong, but I will just say, I would just say this: after that hot prong is fired up, the other prong, the neutral prong, which don't be fooled by the name, it's still pretty important. That is connection from those people to the vision. Because I don't know about you, but I've coached teams before they connected pretty well, but they weren't connected to the purpose or the vision of the team. And so you pretty much just have a great sewing circle, right? We need our people to be fired up for the purpose. So those are the two main prongs. It's all connection. It's connection between the people and a connection from the people to the vision. And then that round prong that's on the bottom of plugs, that's the grounding prong. That literally like takes extra energy and it grounds it further. Not all things have it, like a light, like a lamp. It doesn't have a hot or a grounding prong usually because all of the energy is going to get used. But, you know, in a really complex mechanism, there's going to be energy and excess energy going back and forth. So we have to ground it. And so the grounding prong for team culture is literally how you do what you do on and off the court, on and off the field, on and off the pitch, right? So it's how you show up for practice, do you go all the way to the line or do you go part way to the line? If there's a turnover on a basketball court, is everybody past half court before somebody makes a basket, or do they just stop running and go, oh, our fault? Whatever it is, it's how you do what you do. That grounds your culture. And then all of it is surrounded with this component that keeps it all together. That's the feedback loop. And I think this is where we're really struggling right now. And I think that the feedback loop, listen, I think the essence of great coaching, the difference between good and great and great and elite coaching is the nature and the tone and the timing of how they give feedback, right? It's how do you overcoach? Do you get unfocused and coach 14 different things? Or are you helping your players notice what they're doing so that they can, you know, kind of learn from the ball themselves, how you're coaching, how you're giving them feedback. But here's a bigger problem. And it's one we don't think about in coaching a lot. I think in athletics, especially, feedback only goes in one direction, from coach to player, from head coach to assistant coach. And I'm just here to tell you, the healthier culture, the better your feedback loop is, the more closed your feedback loop, the healthier your culture. The line between cult and culture is super thin. And if you can't get your people on your team, your coaches, your players, whatever, to be able to give you honest and authentic feedback without repercussion, without, you know, blowback, if they're not able to be honest with you, if they're not able to have a different opinion than the people around them, your culture is not going to remain strong over time. It's going to become a cult, right? We don't want a cult because cults are stagnant. They don't grow, right? They're at the whim and the mood of the one person. And I'm sorry, everybody that plays for you has been playing and they all have different experiences. If I can get them to bring all of that together and collaborate, that's huge. I'll tell you, one of the biggest pushbacks I get is that coaches will say, well, you know, I'm still got to be the coach. I got to make the decisions. You're right. You do. You're not getting feedback from your team to build consensus. You're getting feedback so that you can make a more well-informed decision. The more information you have, the easier and better your decisions can be. And making that point with your players, listen, Gen Z wants to be a part of it. They want to be a part of building what they're a part of, right? That's just the fact. It's a fact for all of us. It's especially true for this generation. But you're not getting them to make the decision. You're not going to do everything they say. You're just going to hear them out. And then you are the head coach or whatever, you're going to make the decisions. So don't misunderstand that about the feedback loop. I think this is where people get fired more than any other thing. I think the feedback loop is the magic. And then all of that, the cord represents, that takes the energy from the people to the team. That cord is representing the habits. We build habits automatically as humans because we want our brains to work as efficiently as possible. So our brains are always trying to take processes like that we do a lot and automate them so that it can save its energy for more complex things, right? And so all of these things, connection between the people, connection from the people to the vision, behaviors like how you do what you do and how you receive and give feedback, all of those are at some level, we have habits in all of them. And so if you think about, if you're old like me, when internet first happened, there was this like really skinny dial-up cord. It was like a telephone cord and it made this funny noise, right? And then it got, you know, bigger and broader and broadband and whatever. If you think of internet in that way, the thicker the cable, the faster the signal. It's the same way our brains are formed. We used to think that the neurons and the synapses were where all the magic was. Well, just in the last probably 30 or 40 years, they've really gotten into, and this is really laid out well in Daniel Coyle's book, The Talent Code. He talks about the myelin sheath that surrounds the neurons. The thicker the myelin sheath, the faster the signal it can fire, the higher the skill level, right? The better the habits, the thicker the cord that takes the energy from the people to the team, the better your team. So that is a really quick layout. I'm going to take a breath and just pause and make sure that if you have any questions, this would be a great time to ask. I can continue with some other points, but I'd rather hear from you all and like talk about any questions or comments you have.
Yeah, let's pause there. And coaches, if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and just ask Tree that question now about what she just talked about. If there aren't any questions, Tree, I'll let you kind of continue on and present on what you want to do next, and then we can do another Q&A session after that. But coaches, if you have a question you want to ask Tree, just unmute, and or you can drop the question in the chat if you would rather do that.
I would like to ask a question, and Luke, maybe if no one else wants, they might not be in a place they want to unmute. That's cool. You've been around teams, you talk to coaches all the time. Of all of these components, and this is for anybody, but if nobody else wants to talk, I'll make Luke answer. I'd love to hear like which one strikes you the most, or which one do you think is the biggest pain point that you hear from coaches?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, I think that building the connections between peers is one of the most challenging things for coaches. And I'm sure, and I know that you've worked with teams on that Tree, and probably have a lot of thoughts on that. But that's one of the challenges for me sometimes, depending on the group, and it fluctuates year to year. But you have a team and you want them to be connected well to each other, right? To treat each other in a way that is aligned with your team's values and the kind of culture you're trying to create. But one of the hardest parts of that is that no matter how intentional we are about building our culture, there's a lot of our culture that takes place when we're not around and we don't see it. And it's the peer-to-peer interaction. So I guess what I'm trying to say is shaping the peer-to-peer interactions on our teams. How do we actually get the student athletes to live out these values towards each other? We're trying to model them. We're talking about them. We're trying to teach them. But then when we're not there, what that influencing that connection, obviously we don't have control over it, but I know I want, it's like, man, I want my athletes to treat each other with respect and selflessness when I'm not there. Like, I want them to know what that's actually like. But I think that's just a hard thing to influence.
Totally. That's a phenomenal question. And I'll kind of go two different places. The first thing I will tell you is my most practical tip that I can give you. And it's something that escaped me. I think I did this okay, but I didn't necessarily know that I was doing this. And I think I'm more clear on it now. And it's really as a result of a lot of Brene Brown's work. And if you're not aware of Dr. Brene Brown, she is absolutely, I mean, her stuff is all gold. She's not necessarily a sports person. She's a shame researcher from Texas, but her stuff is really important to know about as a coach, especially today. She talks about in her latest book, Atlas of the Heart, the importance of language, and defining and operationalizing language cannot be overstated for what you just talked about. So what you describe, I talk about, when your locker room sounds exactly the same, whether you're in there or out of there, that's when you're onto something, right? And we have to be super clear about what, like, the words that we're using, we have to define them. I think this is something that PJ Fleck, who I mentioned earlier at Minnesota, does really fantastically. And he's just so consistent. I think that PJ and if you don't know of him, he's like a super energetic. Like he couldn't be more energetically different from Nick Saban or Bill Belichick, but they all, if you watch their press conferences, are doing the exact same thing. They're defining their language over and over again, and they're saying very consistent. They don't, I think that we chase a lot of different rabbits as coaches in an undisciplined way, or from a lack of security. Sometimes we're insecure and we want to prove what we know. And so we chase a lot of rabbits. So I think that getting really clear, I think you start with language. I think you start with language and you define them, because if you sit your team down and you have 14 people on your team and you ask them to define, I don't know, pick a word, hard work, you're going to get 14 different definitions. The more you can get people to understand the terminology that you're going to use in your program and make it as simple and sticky as humanly possible, the more at least you have a start to get people to say the same things that you're saying, right? We want to make them a part of that process, but we want them to know, when I say hard work, I mean this. When I say positive, I don't mean happy-go-lucky unicorns and rainbows. I mean good and useful thinking. That's what I mean. That's what I mean when I say positive. So I'm just going to say that over and over again. And so that's one of the things that really good cultures do, is I think that they just really boil down their main terminology. Because as Brene says, language is a portal. If we don't have language to be able to talk about some of the things that we're doing with our connections, it's really hard to connect. Now, we have other challenges too, because this generation is lonelier than ever. And we're coming out of a pandemic where everybody is at a heightened sense of threat. And so I talked about psychological safety earlier. And I think sometimes coaches roll their eyes when I say that. I don't say psychological safety is key, because I feel like you need to lower your standards for them. I think that this is something that we found out through, the course of research and science. Psychological safety for team performance is monumentally important. But what that means is not that I'm being soft or lowering my standards. It means if I can create a psychologically safe environment, I can push my team way harder. My standards can be so much higher if everybody just knows that no matter what, they're still going to belong to our team. I think that this generation is, I don't think this, I know this, the stats the research behind this, Growing Leaders has a lot of stuff on this that's really helpful. growingleaders.com. If you go to the free resources, they have data on this for days. Gen Z is lonely. They are very lonely. So their connections they're almost always connected, but often that connection's happening in isolation. And by the way, then we had a pandemic where they absolutely had to isolate, right? So their social skills are not the same, and they know it, because I get kids to tell me things that they won't tell their other adults, just because I know the stuff. And when I'm talking to them, I can get them to tell me real things. And they're like, yeah, we don't have social skills. We get it. So I want you to think about it this way. They just have fewer reps. So you've got to help them along in a non-condescending or judgy way, build, I guess, with the art of knowing how to connect. Quickest, most practical thing I can tell you to do is anytime you're with your team, ask a question. And I just did this. I just ran a practice up the road with a high school volleyball team. And then I rushed here to have this webinar. And at the end of practice, I say, get in groups of 3, give me your spark, your joy, and ask me a question. Man, those conversations are so great. So I'm helping, what I'm doing there, it's kind of like when you read and you increase your vocabulary without even realizing it from reading. What I'm doing when I do that is I'm increasing their connection, and I'm giving them extra repetitions, having social connection about real topics with their peers. And so I think those are just a couple of things that you can do to help that along, but just understanding that their connections are 15 miles wide and a centimeter deep, and they know it and they feel it, but they don't know what to do about it. And so we didn't necessarily used to have to teach these skills, but if you want your team to perform at its highest possible level, you'll work extra to fire up the hot prong, and you won't do it in a way that's begrudging or judging them. It's not their fault. It's the nature of the beast. This evolved faster than we civilized it. There's no guardrails around it. And so we've got to be the ones to help them understand how that they can manage this tool in their hand that's robbing them of a lot of time and connection.
That's really good. Thanks for sharing that. I like the question that Coach Hatton just shared in the chat, and would love your insight on it, Tree. What's the main difference or the similarities between team culture and program culture, and how do you work that balance in a sense?
Yeah, I like this question a lot. I want to ask kind of a follow-up if I could, Coach. Are you meaning like you're in a high school coach, there's like a varsity, a JV, and a freshman? Can you give me a little bit more context so I make sure I answer it in a way that's helpful to you?
Yeah, I'll unmute quick. I'm at a university, Cardiff University. So like teams obviously go each year, but we're trying to build a program culture as well. So individual team culture, like year by year, and a overarching program culture that brings people to your university.
Yep. That's a great, I'm so glad I asked that because I would have answered that a totally different way. I think they're one and the same, but I know what you mean, like with the specialness of the year. I think that I've seen this done a bunch of different ways. I think we've got to understand that each team is going to organically grow their own individual cultures from year to year, because even if one person changes, it changes the dynamics. And even if one person doesn't change, we are constantly in a state of growth or change, right? Just as humans. So I think that we're always going to have this evolving culture. And I think, so I think allowing space, I want to be clear, when people just do like team bonding to team bond, that's a part of culture, but that's not culture building, right? And so when I'm talking about culture, I'm talking about being very systematic about each single one of these components that's on your screen, right? And so I think that you have your program, you have a start for your program culture. And if you could go through and go, okay, what's important to me in terms of how we connect? And let's lay that out and define it and make sure we communicate that to our players. And then what are the behaviors that are important? What are the connections to what's the vision and what's the purpose? And how can we connect them to that? What's important there? If you go through each of these little things and evaluate and really think about what's important in each of these components, you're going to constantly build those out. Now, because humans are different and they're gray, those things, the broader you can be, the better, right? You don't want any of this to be your master. So often I see coaches, they usually, not usually, I talk in broad terms sometimes. I need to stop that. Often coaches talk in terms of culture. They hand me their rule book and I'm like, cool, like that's your rules, but that's not your culture, right? And it's what I think that I'm getting out of that is usually coaches are trying to manage their culture by setting, this is the right and wrong of our program. And what happens when you have like these hard, fast rules and you have like level 1 and level 2 and all these different like consequences laid out and whatever. Coach K actually said this in his book a long time ago. I can't think of the name of it. The Winner Within. No, that's Pat Riley. It's escaping me. It's Coach K. Look it up. I'm sure he only has I don't know. But he said this in his book a while, like I've read it years ago and I've just reread it again. We want to make sure that our structure, our program, our culture, our rule book, whatever it is, that system is our servant, not our master. And I think my answer to your question is, you want to make sure that as you lay out your culture, you're doing it from a principled way and from value standpoint and from like defining language and things like that. This is how we do this here in a way that's going to allow you to lead. The way that Coach K put it, he said, so many coaches set all these rules and a lot of times they're reactive and they're based on, things that have gone on past with other players, right? In order to sort of hide like behind them so they don't have to lead. I don't want a bunch of rules. I want, hey, this is our language and here are some guardrails. So if things get bumpy, this is going to help us stay on the road. And that's where I'm going to end. And then I'm going to be able to, from these broad places, make decisions, leadership decisions, and I'm going to be able to do the right thing. So I'll give you an example. So often, say a kid on your team this year, does something and invokes a rule, like makes you make a rule, right? The next year that kid's gone. And now you have two new players in this situation. And you have this rule that they weren't a part of, doing the wrong thing, but now you have this rule, right? This is an example of what I mean when I say keep it broad. If you have in your rule book right now, our players will attend every class. We don't skip class. And if you do, then XYZ happens. Okay, say it's you don't get to play in the next game. Cool. Now say you get to practice on a Wednesday, and that morning, 2 players didn't go to class. One player was helping an old woman who got in a car accident in front of her, and the car caught on fire. And this person, your player, was dragging this woman out of her car, right? Saving this woman's life. The other player stayed out too late and overslept. Are we going to treat them the same? We shouldn't, because that's ridiculous. However, if that's how it's written in your rule book and you make a special exception because this player, whatever, this happens all the time, right? Every other rule in your rule book just became less than. You just lost trust and credibility with the rest of your program. No matter how just it seems, there's going to be a billion gray areas like that. You can't treat those 2 players the same. So instead, if you have, language in your culture that, hey, we attend our classes. We are good, responsible students and we attend our classes. That's the end of the rule. Now, same situation happens. It's pretty easy for me to talk that out. I want to write all of my stuff and I want to construct my culture in a way that allows me to lead. And I think that that's, it's kind of it's a dangerous place to be because we are so reactive and there is sort of a cancel culture. But I would just say that I think Brene says this best. She has some research and out of it came really clear evidence that when it comes to leadership, the future of leadership, and this is a Brene Brown quote, the future of leadership is braver leaders and more courageous cultures. And literally what she means by that is what I just described. It's cultures who don't set a whole bunch of rules so that their leaders can hide behind them and know that they're safe. It's people who get into the nitty gritty and make the right decision based on a set of principles and values and for what's best for the entire team. I don't know if that answers your question. I think in terms of balancing program versus team, I think your program culture is the overriding culture, and you just allow space by making it broad and principled. It allows space for each team to organically grow their own identity.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, Tree, I'm just curious if maybe there's an example that you could share from a team or program you've worked with, or just from your learning, your reading of what you're talking about there, of a culture where they have these overriding values or principles, and then they apply them as situations arise. Like what would that be like? What might those values be, or example of something along those lines?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have an example. I'm going to be able to talk about it, but in a slightly cloaked way. And you'll understand why in a minute. But a program that I worked with for a long time, I actually took the rule book from this coach, and it was like every other rule book that I had before, and I just flipped it. I went through every rule and I rewrote it, and we made it a compass. So literally, they call this book, it's about that thick, and it's called their compass. Because if you think about it, this book is just trying to keep us pointed in this direction, right? So in this compass, 0 rules. I took the rules and I made them into language. These are the words we live by. This is the language that we live by. Every single rule was accounted for, right? So we wrote it that way. Oh, probably second, third year in. We're in the non-championship season for this team. 2 players get arrested for shoplifting. 1 player, who was the ringleader of the whole thing, did not get in trouble. But we got arrests, right? After looking into what had happened, there was the player who did not get actually caught. That player was actually she was making it very unpsychologically safe for the entire team, to the point where we were noticing that we weren't able to get anywhere in our conversations and whatnot. The 2 players who were wrong and they made a big mistake but actually did get caught, those players really, they were younger in the program, and they were kind of under this influence of this player who was older and making it unsafe, and kind of, they were fearful. If we had had a traditional rule book, we would have had to do one of two things. All three players would have had to be removed from the program, or all three players would have had to stay. But the right thing to do was for that one player who was making it unsafe, but who actually didn't get, caught by law enforcement, that player, the right thing to do for that team was for that player to be removed from the team, and the other two players being allowed to, fail forward, if you will. And there wasn't like they got all out off the hook. And it was the right decision. And we were able to make that decision. Now, it was scary, and there's a lot of gray area there, but our compass absolutely covered it, and full backing from an administration, because we were making the right decision. We were so obviously making the right decision. And so often these decisions are not able to be made. And that's when Brené's talking about the future of leadership is braver and more courageous cultures. She's talking about, we want leaders to do the right thing, not hide behind this or that rule, section C, paragraph 4, word 5. That's the stuff that, it's just that bureaucracy is not leadership. And so I don't know if that totally answers your question, but I'll give you another quick one. So let's say drinking, like at the college level, drinking is a thing. And we sat down, I sat down actually with the players in small groups, and we talked through this with a college team that I worked with. And they came up with the idea that, well, we have to follow the law. So if you're not 21, automatically this doesn't apply. But what they wanted to be able to do is, if their parents were in town and they wanted to have a glass of wine on a Saturday after their weekend was over, they wanted to be able to do that and that wasn't going to harm them that much. They didn't want the culture where they were pre-gaming and, getting drunk and stuff like that. So they wrote this guardrail, and it was really specific, but applicable to all situations. And it started with the why of the rule. And it was something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing here, but it was like, we'll never, if you're not 21, obviously you got to follow the law. But it was something to the effect of, we will drink in moderation, never the night before a game or a practice, and never to get drunk, and then they laid out, which means no shots, no hard liquor. Like, in other words, if you want to have a glass of wine or a beer at dinner with your parents, do that, but that's it. And so we got kind of specific, but it was with the why in mind. We started from the why, and it just changed everything. And was it perfect? No. And sometimes you'll have teams go, well, we don't think we need this, we're really good. And I'm like, cool, but you don't know this freshman that's coming in, what their experience, and you need to be able to, this is a tool. Basically, there's a habitude. Growing Leader says habitudes, which are images that form leadership habits and attitudes. There's one called sturdy guardrails. And if you think of where a guardrail is on a road, it's where there's a curve or a ravine or whatever. That's what this is. That drinking thing was just like, no, there's a possible cliff that you might fall off of. And this thing right here that we're writing is just to try to keep you on the road. If you can look at your structures in that way, it's a lot less oppressive. We can power over all day long, but power over is dying as a way of leadership. And it's always been the lowest level. We want to have power with. I want to empower my people to make decisions without being fearful that they're going to get in trouble.
Yeah, that's really good. Thanks for sharing those examples. I'll leave a little bit of space here for the coaches. If you want to drop another question in the chat and or unmute yourself and ask Tree a question, feel free to do that now. If not, I have a follow-up question for you, Tree, but I'll leave about a minute or so here for coaches to either drop something in the chat or unmute and ask Tree a question. Awesome. Well, Tree, this actually kind of goes back to the beginning of our conversation, but I think it connects to what you were just sharing there around what we want from our leaders. And, I was just curious, you talked about authenticity and the importance of it. And you talked about copying others, right? That's a red flag to our athletes that we're not being authentic. If we're just trying to copy what someone else has done, take their culture, take John Wooden's pyramid of success, whatever that might be. I'm curious, like, what are the other maybe red flags for this generation when it comes to their coaches or leaders? Like, what are the things where if they see coaches and leaders doing this, they're like, I'm out on this person. I don't want to follow them. I don't think they're real. They're fake, as the kids say.
Mm-hmm. I love this question so much. I want to clarify one thing. So I will say I'm stealing from coaches all day. What I'm not doing is taking their full thing and just trying to implement that. So think about Ted Lasso, right? He talks, well, actually go one more, like Ted Lasso has the pyramid on the wall in his office, right? If y'all haven't watched Ted Lasso yet, please you're welcome. Go watch it a lot over and over again. But PJ Fleck, he's got 270 some words or whatever that he makes everybody on his team has to know, right? One of his definition for success is the definition that John Wooden had for success. So we're always going to borrow and help, ourselves do that sort of stuff. Totally welcome that. But it's got to be you. Like, it's got to be something that's really important to you. Here's a big red flag. This generation is super risk averse. They're also super, their filters are very, very well worked out, right? Because they have to siphon through thousands and thousands of bit of data every single day, right? So if you're not being real, boy, did they know it, and they know it very, very fast. The biggest one that I see is coaches who are like, yeah, no, we want you to fail. Like, it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to make a mistake. You can, take a big swing. And then, we're process focused. We're going to be focused on the process. And as soon as the kid makes a mistake, when the scoreboard's on, that coach throws the clipboard or loses their minds, or they have a look on their face, or they look down, or whatever. That is the biggest loss of trust that I see coaches doing. And it's hard. So basically it's this: don't say that you're for a healthy culture. Don't say that you're process oriented. Don't say that it's okay to fail and don't believe it, because they will see it, and they might not consciously see it, but they will know that they don't trust you. They just might not be able to articulate why, but I can come to your practice and I can tell you. That's the biggest one that I see coaches is just inauthentic or inconsistent behavior with what they say they want.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. And it's hard not to do. We get wrapped up in the games and performance as well. And to really actually honor what we've said we care about with our behavior, that's like, I mean, it's a quest we're all on in all areas of our lives too. But like you said, it's really important with our team, because if we've told them we value the process, or we want them to take risks, and we're okay with them if they make mistakes. If we don't honor that, again, it's like, oh, you told me one thing and you're doing something else. Like, it's hypocritical. There's nothing, I don't think there's anything in any relationship that breaks trust faster than hypocrisy, right? I've said one thing and I'm doing another, or I've told you I care about this, but now my actions don't align with that. So I think that's such a good reminder and just check for us. Well, Tree, this has been awesome. Before we wrap this up, Tree, you share with the coaches where they can connect with you and or get access to some of the resources that you mentioned. And then coaches, I'll share one final word with you as well.
Yeah, no, first of all, thank you so much for letting me do this. I could talk about, obviously I'm pretty excited about this stuff, and I could talk about it all day. I wish the slides would have worked, but adapt, improvise, and overcome. So we made it. I will send a slide deck to you if you want to pass it on to your coaches.
Would love to. That's perfect.
Yeah. And to get a hold of me, like, honestly, I'm on all the socials and stuff like that. Thanks, Tommy. I see you down there, man. You're the best. My email address is just Tree, like TREE. I'm super short, so it's totally an ironic nickname. Tree@treerootsllc.com is my email address. That's usually the best way, or you can DM me. I don't have my notifications on, but I'll find it eventually. So I'm on Twitter and you have all that. So I'm sure they've seen it.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. Well, coaches, last thing I'll share with you. This summer, we wrapped up our first annual summer coaching series. We had 12 sessions with some coaches and experts from across sports. You can see the names down there, coaches, researchers, former coaches, just some awesome people that shared a lot of awesome content with coaches this summer. If you want to get access to that, you can get $20 off and use that code TREE at summercoachingseries.com. When you get access, you'll get four main things. You get the video replays from all 12 sessions. You get some awesome notes that are written up on each session. You also get all of the sessions on a private podcast feed, just the audio only replays. And then you'll get the slides from all of the presenters as well. So, like I said, if you want to get access to that from the summer, all 12 of those sessions, very similar to what Tree did tonight, but 12 of them with those guests on the previous slide. You can go to summercoachingseries.com. You can check out what all the presentation topics were about and use that code TREE for $20 off. And the last thing that I'll share is this. I haven't had time to get it uploaded yet, but I wanted to gauge interest with some coaches this summer with the new team that I'm coaching. I did a couple film sessions with them. And so I filmed the film sessions. I think that the way coaches do film is a big area of growth, and it's an underutilized area for most coaches, in an area where if coaches got a little bit better at how they use film, it could pay massive dividends. So if you are interested in a couple of all access film sessions that I did with my team this summer about a couple different new concepts that I was introducing to them, send me an email at luke@cuttingedgecoach.com. I'll put you on a list when I get that uploaded and get you information about getting access to it. So you can either get the summer coaching series at summercoachingseries.com, use that code TREE, or just send me an email if you are interested in those two film sessions as well. That does it for today. Again, TREE, thanks so much for your time. Coaches, really appreciate you guys joining us.